All right, West Virginia fans. West Virginia was on the bye week this week, but there was a ton of things that happened around the country that I want to talk about. And I want to talk about how it affects WVU, and we'll break down where WVU goes into the next week. Before we do that, if you're a West Virginia fan, please remember to like and subscribe to JerseyEER. We're approaching the 500 subscriber mark and would love to get there soon. So if you can, please like and subscribe to the show if you enjoy the content. Let's get into the news around the country that affects WVU. And the first one is a close call, right? So if you remember, back in December, West Virginia parted ways with Neil Brown. And one of the top candidates was Andy Kotelnicki. It looked like he made it to the second round of interviews and was a real contender for the job. For a while there, it seemed like Andy Kotelnicki was going to be the next coach at West Virginia. He was a guy that we've seen develop Kansas into a very explosive offense. He was doing some decent things in his first season at Penn State, and it seemed like it might be a good fit and he might be a good person for the job. You can see from this tweet here, he said, "Beyond lucky to be part of the Penn State football family, still a lot to accomplish this season, and I'm looking forward to what 2025 has in store for our program. We are." So he ultimately decided to stay at Penn State. The rumor has it that he wanted to coach the rest of the college football playoff run, and West Virginia wanted him to stop that and get into the portal and build the roster. And that's ultimately why he didn't come. That's what a lot of people are speculating. Who knows? Maybe he was really happy at State College. Maybe he didn't see a path to winning at West Virginia. But he had a chance to take a Power 4 coaching job in a conference that he was familiar with. And he would have been maybe the new coach at West Virginia if he would have said that he wanted to come. He ultimately decides to pass that opportunity up, thinking that they're going to go on this long playoff run and do really big things next year. And ultimately, that is not happening at all. Yes, they did make it to the semifinal round last year versus Notre Dame, but they kind of choked in that game, to be honest with you. They had a chance to win that game and put that game away, and they couldn't do it. And his offense didn't really look great in that game. If you remember in that game versus Notre Dame, Penn State didn't complete a single pass to a wide receiver the entire game. It was all running backs and tight ends. So as much of an offensive guru as this guy is, it was a bad look that not a single receiver caught a ball in that game, in a spotlight game, especially when you have a quarterback like Drew Aller. You had some decent pieces at wide receiver, in my opinion, last year. We saw what they did against West Virginia. So then you're like, okay, year two, you bring Kotelnicki back to Penn State. You have Drew Aller, who looked like a first-round pick. You brought in 3 talented receivers from the transfer portal. Let's run it back and see what we can do at Penn State. And they got off to a really slow start offensively. I remember watching them versus FIU and watching them, and it was only like 16-0 at some early point in the game. And I'm like, and some Penn State fans are kind of worrying about the offense. And I said, listen, they're probably not showing much on film right now. They are probably saving it for the Oregon game. Then we actually see them play a Power 4 competition, and the offense just doesn't look right. Drew Aller has not looked like a first-round NFL draft pick. His stock is definitely dwindling. He was injured yesterday in that game. They announced he's out for the season. They were not able to beat Oregon, not able to beat UCLA. Being able to beat Northwestern. So now you're going to look at this new cycle that's coming up. How many Power 4 programs are going to be calling up Andy Kotelnicki to be their head coach? I don't know. I would be surprised if any right now. So I don't know. Does this guy have regret not making the trip to West Virginia? Is he happy with his decision? Who knows? But right now it just seems like things are very uncomfortable there for him. And who knows? Would he have done well at West Virginia? I don't know. I mean, it would have depended on what the roster looked like. Would he have brought Bo Premble with him over from Penn State, who seemed to fit their offense? I think that's another conversation that Penn State fans might be asking themselves. Is Bo Premble the better option for them at quarterback under this guy's system? You saw what he did with Jalen Daniels. There's a lot of questions here. And some people might be like, well, West Virginia doesn't look good with Rich Rodriguez either, but at least with Rich Rodriguez, you have a good track record with Rich Rodriguez. He's won at West Virginia. He's been a head coach. Andy Kotelnicki has not been a head coach. So he's an offensive coordinator you were going to take a chance on. And right now, it looks like it's kind of working out in West Virginia's favor that we didn't give this guy an opportunity to be a head coach, because right now his stock is definitely falling, and I don't think that many people are going to be calling him up to be a head coach. Now, do I still think he's a good offensive coordinator? Yes, I think that he will land a job if ultimately Penn State decides to part ways with their coaching staff after the season, which we're going to get to next. But just interesting to kind of look back on this as a close call for West Virginia if this guy would have been the head coach, because right now it seems like we might have dodged a bullet there. All right, let's talk about Penn State too. James Franklin under fire. $48.6 million buyout up there in State College. Kind of makes me feel a little bit better about where we were with like the Neil Brown situation. I was almost embarrassed as a West Virginia fan for a few years that we were struggling so much and we couldn't afford to buy out Neil Brown. It was like, how can people take us seriously as a football program if we can't afford to buy out a coach? And now seeing Penn State kind of have a similar issue with James Franklin is a little bit refreshing, because I feel like Penn State is a really successful program. I've been to games there. It just looks different up there. They have 110,000 people in their stadium. They have a huge alumni base, and they have a lot more resources than West Virginia. So the fact that they're struggling with their buyout is kind of interesting. So, I'm recording this video at like 10 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday. So keep an eye on this. Who knows? Maybe Penn State decides to part ways this week with James Franklin, maybe even today. But that's going to be the buyout if they want to do it. Penn State, hasn't beaten a Power 4 team this season, which is really surprising with how talented their roster is. Scouting them last year with the roster they had they were super impressive. You saw what they did. They were on the doorstep of a national championship game. They brought most of their roster back thinking that they have a chance to run it back, and it has not gone this way. And James Franklin deserves a lot of the criticism that he's getting, because in years past, they've won the games they're supposed to and lost the big ones. Well, this year they're losing the big ones and they're losing the games they're supposed to get. So I don't know, maybe after 11 years of hearing the same message and the same voice, it's time for a change. But that's ultimately something that Penn State's going to have to decide. Now, if James Franklin does indeed get fired, or he resigns, or they move on at the end of the season, that could have a major effect on West Virginia, right? First off, roster turnover, right? This is the case for also places like Virginia Tech. West Virginia, Penn State, Virginia Tech often recruit in the same battleground, right? New Jersey, Virginia, Pennsylvania. The top recruits in the Northeast look at those schools. So if Penn State parts ways with their coach, there's going to be a decent amount of guys that enter the portal, I would think, right? We saw it with our own team, right? How many guys entered the portal with a new coaching change? How many guys went to Penn State for Penn State, and how many of them went to for James Franklin? Who knows? But that's something you have to keep an eye on as a West Virginia fan, especially into this offseason. What does the roster turnover look at Penn State? And is there a chance that we can get some of the guys? And we're going to talk about that in the next slide. And you also have to think about the status of recruits, right? If recruits watch football and they see what's happening, if they see a coach that they signed up to play for getting booed and they hear "Fire Franklin" all throughout the stadium, are they going to decide to sign there and commit there and stay committed there? So that's another thing that keep an eye on, right? The guys that were committed to Penn State that might not be committed anymore, could West Virginia get back in those conversations? So just keep an eye on that. It does have an effect on West Virginia. And speaking of Penn State to West Virginia, we've had some decent players come from there in the past. Let's look at Lance Dixon first, right? Lance Dixon was a highly touted linebacker at Penn State. Didn't get much playing time, had a fresh start at West Virginia, did some decent things. Ultimately, I think he got kicked off the team in 2003, ended up playing at Toledo. But when he was on the field, he did some decent things. He was a nice contributor to the West Virginia defense. So we were happy to have him. Fertoma Moba is another guy that just didn't see much playing time at Penn State, comes back to West Virginia and gets some really decent playing time, did some really good things last year, was in an NFL camp this year because he just needed the opportunity to play. So how many guys on the Penn State roster that are similar to these guys, right? That just aren't seeing playing time that might want to go down to West Virginia to get more playing time. And one guy that we have here is Daniel Jennings, a guy from Princeton, West Virginia. West Virginia and Penn State last year we're down to his top two. He was ultimately choosing between Penn State and West Virginia. He ultimately chooses Penn State. Now, I have no idea if this guy plans to transfer. I'm just speculating, right? This is just an exercise, right? So he's not getting much playing time at all. If you look at their depth chart week by week, I have not seen him on the depth chart for Penn State there yet. So is this a guy that signed up to play for James Franklin? Things aren't going good. He's not getting playing time. That would say, okay, West Virginia has 10 out of 11 starters next year. They're all seniors. Maybe I can go home to West Virginia and play a little bit more. We've seen this happen in the past. We've seen guys like Nestor, who played at Virginia Tech, but ultimately decided to come back to West Virginia and had a great rest of his career. We saw Robbie Martin do that this year, right? Robbie Martin hasn't played for West Virginia or played much yet for West Virginia, but a guy that went to NC State and then ended up coming back to West Virginia. So there's no place like home. So again, not sure how happy he is at Penn State. He might love it there. He might see playing time next year because he's a young player. But I would keep an eye on that just because of the way that things go with transfer portal and his West Virginia connection. And we were in the top two. If things go sideways at Penn State these next few weeks or at the end of the season, I would keep an eye on him and see what his decisions are about his future. All right, let's talk about the Big 12. So, interesting stuff here. If you look at the Big 12 standings from top to bottom, BYU and Texas Tech and Cincinnati are at the top of 3-0 conference records, followed by Utah, Arizona State, Houston, Baylor with the 2-1 records. Iowa State has really come back down to earth with a 2-2 record now. Kansas has come back down to earth 2-2. Kansas State, nice win over TCU. They're now 2-2 in the conference, so they're starting to wake up a little bit. That's what more we expected from Kansas State than what we saw early in the season. Arizona 1-2, TCU 1-2. We're going to talk about them in a second. Colorado 1-3, UCF 0-3, West Virginia 0-3, and Oklahoma State 0-3. So those are the Big 12 standings heading into next week. The next thing is, is Texas Tech running away with this thing? Going into the offseason, we talked a lot about Texas Tech because they made so much noise about how much money they spent in NIL and what they did in the transfer portal. And so far, it is paying off, right? You look at the game so far. They crushed Arkansas, Pine Bluff, crushed Kent State, whooped Oregon, won convincingly at Utah, which is impressive. Had no problem at Houston, and then they steamrolled Kansas yesterday. So they haven't had a close competitive game this season. They get Arizona State next week at Arizona State, but who knows with Sam Levitt's health situation what that looks like. I think even in that, Texas Tech is probably the better team. Oklahoma State has been a doormat this season. They have at Kansas State, so that team's getting hot, so maybe that's a tough game. BYU, obviously we saw is undefeated, and then they get UCF and West Virginia. So if they can just get through this little part of the schedule, which they should possibly be favored in all the games moving ahead, Texas Tech might just run away with this thing. And my question is this a good thing for the Big 12 or is it not? I don't know. I think it might be a good thing for 1 year, right? If we have one team that is just head and shoulders better than everybody. We need teams to do well in the college football playoff. If we're going to gain respect around the country as a conference, we kind of need a team to go on a run. Look what TCU did a few years ago. They ran through the conference, and then they go to the national championship game. They unfortunately get embarrassed there, but because they had such a solid regular season, they made it to the college football playoff. And they won a big game against Michigan, which got some national respect. So we need our teams to represent ourselves well in that playoff. So Texas Tech looks like a contender. They look like a team that could be a top 5 team this year. That's how good they are. So I'm not sure if it's the worst thing in the world if Texas Tech is really dominant. It would be funny, though. West Virginia, we play them November 29th. Could we reverse the roles of the 13-9 game? Not that they were in that 13-9 game, but if Texas Tech needs that win, could we play spoiler at home? That could be something fun to watch. So Texas Tech, they're going to be interesting, but I think they're the real deal, and I think there's a good chance that they can run away with this thing. All right, let's talk about winnable games for West Virginia. So these next few games are extremely important for West Virginia. You get the bye week. Hopefully you got healthy. hopefully the state of the team and state of the locker room is cohesive, and that this team wants to win some games, because we need some positive momentum for next season. And we just have to try to win these games. So you get at UCF, another team that hasn't won a conference game. This is probably the most winnable game besides maybe Colorado this season. We're on the road, but we're coming off of a bye week, so that should help us a little bit. So we've done well against UCF since they've joined the conference. We're 2-0 against them. So Saturday's game versus UCF is extremely important for West Virginia if they want to turn the season around. If they lose this game, yikes. So hopefully they can find a way to win and be competitive. If they can get a win here, maybe it gets some positive momentum moving forward. TCU has come back down to earth. You get them at home. Who knows where their headspace is after they had a hot start, but now they're coming back down to earth. Houston's a good team. That one might be tough, but then again, you also get Colorado. So there are some winnable games out here, and it's going to be important that West Virginia snags a few more wins this season. I do not want to see us finish 2-10. That would be a disaster first season, in my opinion, even though we beat Pitt. So it's important to get these games. And how about Pitt? Give them credit. They beat Florida State yesterday, so maybe they're not as bad as we thought they were. Maybe that can give us some confidence, right? We beat a Pitt team that beat Florida State, that crushed Boston College. Who knows? Maybe that can give us some confidence moving into the future. And that's all I got. So again, short video. Wanted to talk about some of the things happening in State College, talk about Texas Tech a little bit in the Big 12, and then preview the schedule ahead. Now that we're back into game week, there'll be more videos out previewing the UCF game this week, talking football, getting some basketball a little bit, and things like that. Really appreciate you guys. Have a great Sunday. Enjoy the NFL games. We'll talk to you soon.